Hi, my name is Jonna Workentine, and today I'll be presenting my translation for my final project for um, this Proto-Indo-European class. So my um, project was a translation of a Russian lullaby, which in Russian it's known as Баю-баюшки-баю, ложился краю, which in English I translated that as hush, sleep tight, don't sleep on the edge of the bed. There's no word for bed in this name, but it's like implied. And in Pi I translated as κτnom, sesdʰí, me sesdʰí, hippie, poksói, ktrosi. And so this is a famous Russian lullaby. It's a type of death or dirge lullaby, and I'm not going to be singing it for you guys today. I have a terrible voice, but I will play a little bit of the song so you guys know what it sounds like.
Баю-баюшки-баю, не ложися на краю, с краю свалишься, переплачешься.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm awful. Not arrange view. Here we go. Okay. I will talk a little bit about what a death and a dirge lullaby is when I talk about my research, which is right now. So I did a research about a couple different topics because I thought it would be more illuminating for my own translation to do so. So I looked up a little bit about lullabies in of themselves. Like one article I read, Spitz 1979, talked about how folk lullabies, specifically about Russian lullabies, often communicate cultural concepts as filtered through an individual singer because lullabies are a bit flexible. There's the typical ways people sing them, but you can like change things up as long as it fits a specific rhyme and a specific like melody. And so it talked a lot about how it talked about this concept of a death or a dirge lullaby because there's different genres of lullabies within Russian culture. And death and dirge lullabies oftentimes are like violent or sometimes end in the singer, the mother dying, or sometimes the child dying or being injured. And they argue that it's supposed to communicate either the fears of the mom or the frustrations of the mom being trapped in a relationship in a marriage during a patriarchal time, or there's different things that they argue in this article. And another thing I read about was about pi specifically, and it talked about like person marking in pi, and about how when reconstructing pronouns in pi, um, they took into account that there's like different forms of pi as time progresses, and that pronouns should use more archaic forms because pronouns are some of the most archaic words in a language and thus maintain systems that might have otherwise been lost, such as, like, for example, English case, which we don't have really anywhere else. Also, they talked about how ablaut still persists in some English words where it doesn't persist in other words, such as in bear, bore, sit, sat. I also looked at imperatives, and one article I read argued that imperatives can be used in relation to modals to express desires, wants, and purpose. So in a lullaby, it has functions of expressing these things to the child or to whoever's listening. And so some difficulties I ran into while translating were cultural differences between Proto-Indo-European culture and Slavic culture. Like, for example, I'll talk about this a little bit later in my culture section, but in the song, in the final verse that I translated, it talks about bread or like buns or whatever. And I had to change that because there was no agriculture in Proto-Indo-European culture. So there was no bread because there was no wheat. So I changed it to the word meat instead of bread. We also didn't really talk about future tense that deeply, so I wasn't able to really decline words into future. I think I did it once, but I did that with help. So I rendered everything into present tense instead because I thought it still communicated the meaning of the text, even if maybe not the exact form. I lack certain words, so I made certain substitutions. Like, for example, I lacked the word for like place or where. So instead I translated to the word for meadow. I lacked the word for gray, as in gray wolf, so I translated to dark because gray I think is supposed to communicate a type of wolf, but also like a menacing aspect of the wolf, so I thought dark communicated that just as well. Also, when I was originally compiling my original Russian text translated to English and then to Pi, I ran into an issue where there were different forms of the text because lullabies, as I mentioned earlier, are flexible. There's different versions. So I had to pick and choose which ones I thought worked thematically and also which ones I thought sounded the best. And I also shortened it a bit because it can go on for as long as the singer wishes. Um, so some of my translation. These are the first couple verses. They repeat often throughout the song. So it would be something like tek nom sesdí, mia sesdí epi poksói ktrosi. The original text, it would be Baju-bаюшки-баю, ложился краю. As I mentioned earlier, this in English would be like something like hush, sleep tight. I also thought about the translation rockabye baby because it's something that exists in English already in lullabies. As everyone knows, a very famous English language lullaby about the cradle and the tree and stuff. And then also be don't sleep on the edge of the bed is implied. But in the translation, I put it literally because, you know, I could use genitive because κτnom is in vocative. Sesdí is it's the word for it's the verb sleep, but it's imperative. Mia means like no. Typically it's nia, but mia when used with imperatives. Ap means like near. Poksói means edge, like trosio means bed. I just use it because I wanted to use a genitive and I thought it communicated meaning. So, anyways, the reason why I translated the first couple lines the way I did was the word bayu and bayushki don't have literal translations in English. They're derived from the word bayukat, which means to sing lullabies or to rock to sleep, but they're not declined the way you would typically in most ways. So that's why I translated it as rockabye baby. Anyways, because I thought it doesn't have the literal meaning, but I thought it communicated the same kind of thing, or like hush sleep tight, because that's what it really means, kind of. So another phrase from my my translation, of tungus wolkos guimti, and this means the dark wolf comes. There's no word for gray as in gray wolf, so I use the word for dark as I mentioned earlier. Logos is dark, it's adjective. Wolkos means wolf. Guempty means to come. It's in third person singular, present active, so on. Yeah, another sentence or two sentences from my translation. So baksom tewe grepies dinketi so druksu twe piereti. In English, this would be he will grab you by the side of your body and drag you into the woods. So means he. Baksom means like side, but it's in accusative. Tuele means like your, but it's a genitive. Crepies means body, but it's a genitive. Tinkiti means bite. It doesn't mean grab, but I thought it communicated a similar meaning. Because because wolves don't have hands, so bite works too. Sorry, I was just thinking. So drusu, so of course means he. Drusu means trees. It's vocative. Way means you. Kiriti means like to bring. There wasn't a word for drag, so I thought bring communicated the same thing. And so another thing I want to note about my translation is in the original song, oftentimes the singer will use the child they're singing to's name in the song because it's like I didn't mention any of these phrases in my presentation, but there's some phrases that go like, for example, and Masha will lay beneath a bush and a berry will fall into her mouth or something like that. And they use the word Masha, which is like a name, um, a diminutive form of a name. Um, and but this would change depending on whoever you're singing to. And since I didn't want anyone to use a name, I used the word for child instead, Կնում, except the only exception is to be at the very first phrase because it doesn't mention a name, but I added one for meaning purposes. So another thing I wanted to note is that oftentimes the children's names are done in diminutives. Diminutive is a form of a word or a name that can communicate a couple different things, such as size, tenderness to the speaker, relationship to the speaker, etc. Like usually it means something small, either that they're talking about something very tenderly or speaking to a child, or that the person they're talking to has a close relationship to the speaker. Like a mom would use a child's name in a diminutive. Oftentimes friends won't actually use their real names, but would use a diminutive form of their name. Like for example, like from Anna, Anya. Anya is a diminutive form of Anna, so on and so forth. In the song, also it uses the word волчок, which is a diminutive form of the masculine volk, would read wolf. And I read it in one of the papers I read, it actually mentioned this song, and they theorized that this either had to do with the fact you're singing to a child or that they're talking about the wolf tenderly, and that's represented some tension between the violence of the song and tenderness, or that to soothe the child in some kind of way. But anyways, the reason I bring it up is because there aren't diminutives in pi as far as we know, and as far as we have talked about, at least in this class, so I didn't really include them in my translation, and they're sort of lost in translation. And finally, I want to talk about some of the culture I used in my translation. So I obviously pulled from lullabies, which derive from Slavic culture, and like as I mentioned earlier, music communicates cultural meaning. Like one of the papers talked about like fear of death, mother's concerns, etc. There is some evidence that wolves had importance in Proto-Indo-European culture, either as feared symbols of death or of battle or strength. They maybe had a place in rituals and mythologies. In one of the papers I read, it said that the word wolf possibly went through a taboo transformation for various reasons, or that they possibly represented some existential threat as being a wild animal to these nomadic peoples. They're dangerous. And also the song had a lot of natural descriptions of like trees, meadows, forests, wild animals, berries, things Pi people would come into contact with. And also another thing, as I mentioned earlier, I changed the word bread or buns to meat because of lack of agriculture in Pi culture. And that is my final slide. Thank everybody for a great semester, and that is all I have to share today.